Hey there, welcome to Her Truth Revealed, unraveling our midlife era. I'm your host, Wonderful Morrison. This space is for the woman who's done pretending, done hiding, and ready to step fully into her truth. Midlife isn't about fading into the background. It's a time where resilience lights the way and authenticity becomes the loudest voice in the room. In this season of our lives, we are more than just survivors. We are creators, revolutionaries, and unapologetic women rewriting the rules. I've been through my battles, rebuilding from loss, betrayal, and heartache. But here's the truth. Every challenge, every tear, and every setback has led me to this moment of profound transformation. Together, we're going to dive into raw, real conversations that shatter stereotypes, tackle the tough stuff, and embrace the powerful magic that is midlife. So, if you're ready to live this chapter with boldness and joy, hit subscribe. Share this episode with someone who needs to hear it and leave a review so we can keep this revolution going. Ladies, no more masks, no more apologies, just the truth of who we are. Let's do this. Hello and welcome to another episode of Her Truth Revealed. I know it's a new title, but you're going to be so excited because here we're unraveling this thing called our midlife era. And today I have a special guest. She is nearing that midlife space, but Kat Polsinelli. Please tell me I said that correct.
You said it beautifully.
So glad. Her journey from performing on stage at age 10 to surviving a decade-long abusive relationship is one of profound resilience, which is, I think, the best. That's such a giant language to unpack. Resilience. Now, she is a motivational speaker, an MC, best-selling co-author, and host of Real Chat with Kat. Has a ring to it, right? A top 10% globally ranked podcast. Kat is dedicated to empowering others to turn their struggles into stepping stones for success. And I know you're probably like, oh my gosh, I hear that all the time. But no, wait till we get into it, okay? A former single mother at 16, Kat speaks with raw honesty about overcoming personal hurdles, inspiring audiences to rise above challenges and embrace our inner strength. So we're focusing on topics like domestic violence awareness, personal growth, redefining oneself, and all of our talks are relatable, actionable, providing all of our audience with tools for real change. And as a speaker, she's been featured at universities, women's panels, charity events. I mean, this woman, come on. I could literally just keep talking. But what she does in her free time is she likes to hike with her family, or my other favorite activity, sing karaoke. We are meant for each other, Kat. So welcome to Her Truth Revealed. And I'm really excited to have you here because I think it's important to kind of bring back into the forefront this conversation about abusive relationships, because the most popular language right now that we hear is this word called narcissism. Look at your face. But the thing is, we don't really know what that is, right? And people who haven't been in relationships that had that type of struggle of abuse, tell us a little bit about what got you to be a public speaker now, writing books, and talking to audiences about abusive relationships.
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. And I love speaking on this topic because, one, as a young child, I was always the one that stood up for everybody. If there was an issue, if somebody was being bullied, if it was a really good friend of mine whose boyfriend wasn't treating her right, like I was always the one to just stand up for it. And it wasn't until probably 6 or 7 years after I had left the abusive relationship that like this kind of kept coming up. And that was the time that I started to understand who I was, and I was starting to get those pieces back of me. I mean, 10 years of being in a very abusive, emotionally, psychologically damaging relationship, it really breaks down how you even view yourself. And so it really took a lot of time. And it was like the more that those pieces kept coming back, the more it was this realization of like, oh my gosh, I have always been that person. No wonder this keeps coming up for me. No wonder I keep wanting to do this. So when I found myself in the entrepreneurial space after being in medical for over 10 years, I just kind of started sharing that as a piece of who I was. And the more that I shared it, the more that people kept coming to me, the more that people kept saying, oh my gosh, it's been 20 years. I still don't talk about this. And even those that hadn't been in abusive situations, I was able to really have an open, non-judgmental conversation with them on just some of the things that they're dealing with, because trauma is trauma. And while it affects all of us wildly different, there's a lot of things that are also very similar, depending on, how you experienced it and then how it has now played out into your life. And so it just kind of became a part of me. And the more that I kept owning it, it actually helped me heal through a lot of things. And then through that, it was like this epiphany of like, oh my gosh, well, if I was able to help myself and I was able to get away from having PTSD, anxiety, a heart condition, and now look at where I'm at, how many other people are suffering silently that could use this information? And sometimes it's not pouring down people's throats what they need to learn, but just honoring where they are at in the journey and where it is that they then decide they want to take themselves from there. And that's where I come in of like, that's where motivational speaking really speaks to me. How can I share my journey, give you tips and tricks, talk about the things a lot of people don't want to talk about, and then you get to walk away and decide what bit of that motivated you, what bit of that connected to you, and what pieces of that do you want to then take because now you've decided you want to do something different.
Wow. And I love what you're saying in terms of sharing little bits and pieces, because I think that's the problem. Right? People don't want to share because it's like, oh gosh, I got to puke out my whole life story. But in this now sharing over time of that experience, what have you found to be like what people are unwilling to talk about? Is it more, I mean, abuse in itself has a lot of shame in it and guilt in it, right? No matter what format it is. But what do you think is for women especially, what are we so afraid to let people know?
I think people, especially women, are most afraid to let people know that they made choices purely out of love, and then those choices destroyed them. And then we take all of that, which is not our own shame, right? It's not our own faults. There's always somebody else that's involved with it, but because we loved so openly, or we wanted to nurture and we wanted to care for someone so much, we allowed them into a space that we don't allow most people. And then because we did, and when we finally realized that, we were so hurt that we don't know how to compensate for that. So then it's like we become one of two things. We either one, continue in that cycle and keep looking for someone that's going to love us the way that we love that one person, or we shut everything down so hardcore and disconnect, which is what I did, that we don't even know what it means to have emotions. I didn't know what it meant.
Hand up, hand up.
Did not know what it meant to have emotions for the longest time, because when I did, I was hurt from it or I was judged for it. And what ended up really affecting me, and I've seen this with a lot of women as well, is how that then in turn meant how I dealt with my children, how I dealt with my family, and how I dealt with others that are around me at that point in time, which caused a lot of drama in my life and a lot of situations that now I am having to own so that I can make sure that my kids don't live with those wounds because I was raising them from an unhealed space.
Wow, that is such a vulnerable sentence, because I feel that way. My abuse didn't come from like a romantic relationship. It was my father, and physical, right? The whole thing. I often say that like, oh my gosh, healing myself helps me to be a better parent, right? And I'm sure our audience is feeling the same way. So because like for me, it's even just really hard to say, oh yeah, me too, right? So I know that there's a ton of people out there that feel this way. And we're not necessarily like, let's be motivational speakers and get out there and share our stories. So is that one of the reasons what propelled you into speaking publicly is because so many women who came to you afterwards, like me too, but didn't want to share, right? So
Mhm.
how does that, because I feel like that's another thing is we want to know we're heard by hearing somebody else's story. But then where do we go as women who are maybe suffering from that, but we don't want to talk? So how did you just decide I'm going to get in front of audiences and talk about this?
It honestly wasn't a decision that I planned on making in the beginning. I went through it, I came out of it, I lived my life with my kids, I started life over. And I honestly planned on trying to like leave it away, like in the back and pretend it just never happened. And when I got into the entrepreneurial space and I started realizing that not only was I able to help people in their businesses, and not only could I help them like strategize and figure things out, but like the more that I started listening to what people were saying, the more that I realized that I'm like, there is hurt that is connected to that. There's a reason why you're not making that decision. And it's not because of the logical piece that you keep thinking it is. It's because of something much deeper. And then, like I said, that's when I started sharing my story. And I was like, you know what? I never had anyone that could relate to me. Even when I got out of my relationship, no one around me had been in that situation. So I didn't have someone I could share with. I didn't have someone that I could go to and be like, am I crazy? I keep thinking this and I keep feeling this way. I didn't have that. I I even tried therapy. That didn't work for me either because I couldn't find someone that could connect with me. So here I am, all alone, raising two kids, crying myself on the way to work, crying to myself on the way home, reliving things when I go down certain roads and having to pull over on the side of the road because I'm vividly seeing an altercation or something that happened and reliving all of those emotions. And then going to bed just crying because I'm like, I don't understand. I feel like I'm completely bonkers. Like I'm trying so hard to keep it together. I'm trying so hard to be a mom, and everybody keeps saying, you're so strong. And I'm like, I don't feel like it. And I
Yeah.
realized when I started talking to more people that most of us feel this way. Whether you've been in an abusive relationship, whether you've had abuse as a child, whether you experience any type of traumatic event, there is some piece of you that like hides away because it fears that nobody will understand. And so you begin to think that you're crazy and you begin to think that nobody would get this. And you begin to think that there's no way other people went through this. I was so stupid. How did this go on this long? And so I wanted to create a space where people could resonate with not only the words coming out of my mouth, but the emotions behind the words that I'm presenting. And the only way that I can do that is by publicly speaking to other people and sharing my story and honestly giving people like, this is what I felt like. And I thought I was crazy. This is what I did. And now I realize that I shouldn't have, because that is what people are looking for when they're trying to figure out, I feel like something should be different. I feel like maybe I should be doing something. But when you can't make the connection to another experience, sometimes it's hard. And, no matter what books that you read and things like that, if you are not ready to understand it and then take that information, you can only go so far. So when I started being able to connect with other people's stories, I realized that I, through my pain, had a gift I needed to give to others. And that was making sure that this became more of a talked about subject, because too many times with too many people I have spoken with, have met with, have known over the years, hide from all of the imperfections, from all the things that we've suffered through, because nobody likes to share that.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the reason I have decided to shift my podcast for more of these personal spaces because I think that's the last step of my healing, right? I got to talk about my own crap. And it is not easy at first, but be connecting with people like you who are now on the other side of that, who are really seeing the unfolding of, wow, that was an old version of me and the new version of me. Walk us through your transition. Okay, so you're a mom. Now you had mentioned you were 16 and get in this relationship. It's abusive. You walk away, which is kudos to you, girl. Get it. Walk away from it. And then now you're kind of like, who am I now? Right? What am I doing? the transition, because I feel like a lot of the language, women, especially in this time with COVID and the way that the global shift is just moving, we're sort of confused. And, the other day I had a conversation with a group of ladies, and this one lady said she felt sad, but she didn't know why. Like her life was great. So are these things we're not really talking about either? Like we're talking a lot about healing, we're talking a lot about this, but what is a transitional space that that made you really relatable to other women?
I would say that the transition from, not knowing who I am to trying to figure it out or beginning to realize I needed to, and then kind of where I'm at now, I feel like some of the things that we don't share as much are the hard spaces. Because again, we judge a lot. I used to judge a lot.
Uh-huh.
And so women generationally have been known to judge a lot. And so we talk about community and we talk about lifting each other up and we talked about building with each other. But what I'm not seeing and what I'm starting to see more, but what I was not seeing around that time was people just being honest with each other, So if you're having a conversation with a friend and your friend's like, "Oh my gosh, how are you doing?" Your immediate reaction isn't, "I'm fine." It's, "I'm having a really crappy day and I don't know why." And giving that space, being open and honest. And that's really hard when, one, we haven't been taught to be understanding to other people's issues. And two, for most of us, we don't know what it feels like to be safe when we're actually open with that, because a lot of us are so used to being hurt or made fun of or told that we're too much or that we're overreacting. And so again, and women are emotional beings. I mean, we just are. And that was a really hard one for me to accept for a really long time. Because for me, the longest time feeling any type of emotion or especially getting upset, that created such a space for my ex to be able to attack me that I learned to shut that down. And so it became a part of, well, you can't do that because that's not safe. And so when I got with my husband and that kind of started to come out with the help of an amazing coach that walked me through a lot of things, I had to learn that crying has nothing to do with being weak. It has nothing to do with a space of being unsafe. It has everything to do with releasing all of the pent-up emotions, because we don't express it the way that men express it. I've seen having boys that they express it through anger a lot, right? Or hyperfixation. They've got a really hyper focus on something to try to get away from something else. And women try to follow along in that, but we don't fit in that box. And so sometimes we just need a good cry. And my poor husband, bless his heart, has come into the bathroom before and be like, "Oh my God, are you okay? I thought everything was fine." And I'm like, "I'm good. Just give me 5 minutes." It's literally all I need. But what I stopped doing was putting a meaning behind the reason why I was crying.
That is so, so good. I think, because you're right. I think we were all pretty much generationally raised with that. If you're going to have these big emotions, you need to know why. Really, especially coming out of something abusive where you were told how to feel or not to feel, you don't have any kind of meaning behind that particular emotion in that particular time. The other thing that you hear a lot of is being triggered. There's a lot of triggers. So now you're speaking, you had told me in our first conversation that you speak to domestic violence survivors. And with that, there's that word trigger. How does that, abuse never goes away. It's not like it was happening only in the 60s, in the 70s. It wasn't like it was just happening in your town to you.
Mhm.
I mean, it's pretty prevalent everywhere, all over, in different formats of it. Talk us through what you've seen when you're speaking to domestic violence survivors. What trigger is, like, what is it really? Because I think we talk about it, but we don't really know what it is in that way, right? We know it personally, but then we don't know what to do with it either sometimes, right?
Yeah. And I feel like the word trigger has become like the word narcissism or like the word empowerment. It has become such a blanketed statement, and it has also kind of become an excuse word. That's just my personal opinion. I know it's going to upset some people, but if you're using it in the correct terms, to me, the full meaning of a trigger is it is something that puts you in an unsafe space in a moment because your brain is associating that moment with something you've been through before that it didn't know how to handle then, right? So for instance, my oldest son and I, we went head to head when he was a teenager. And at that point in time, I had been away from my ex for probably 5 or 6 years. And what I didn't realize at the time was, for me, a trigger at that time, which was also an emotion I had not dealt with, was if my son got in my face and started yelling at me, I immediately got defensive. And so I would stand up to him toe to toe and kind of forget that I was mom, because I was like, I'll be darned, you're going to respect me, back off, or you're going to get hit. Like, that was the space that I was in. But when I think back to that, I know that every time he got in my face, it put me back in time of every time that my ex got in my face, of every time my ex made me feel small, of every time my ex made me feel stupid or anything like that. And because my brain had held on to those memories, it's the only thing it knows how to piece together. So when something similar happens, it immediately goes, warning, this is what's happening. This is what you're about to feel. We've got to get defensive. Versus me seeing it's just my son who's upset, who's also triggered by something that is unhealed in him because of the things that he had seen. And so triggers are something to be aware of, but they're also something to learn from. And you're right. It's been 10 years since I stepped out of my relationship. There are still times that things happen that I get like a twinge and I'm like, oh, hold on. And I have to take a moment to think about it and realize what my brain is associating it with. And then I can debunk it. I'll give you an example. My husband and I, one time, we were having a conversation on the couch. He had been gone for a week. He came home. Our neighbor had asked him to stop by real quick. And he had just come back over and sat on the couch. And he's like, oh, I got to tell you what the neighbor said. And I'm like, what? And he's like, oh, he was, giving me crap about this, and da da da. And he said, there was a car in your driveway all week. I immediately shut down. I felt like I had done something wrong. I felt like I was doing something I wasn't supposed to. And I was like, wait, what? And my husband was like, I know, I just thought it was funny. And he was like, I've been gone all week. And I stopped for a second. I was like, hold on, time out. I was like, I have to tell you what just went through my brain. And he was like, what are you talking about? And I said, what you just said immediately made me feel like I needed to apologize to you. I was like, even though I didn't do anything wrong, and it was my son's girlfriend that had stopped by, that had been with us. So I knew who the car was, but I immediately felt like I needed to explain myself and I needed to make the situation right. It had nothing to do with that. But that's what my brain was used to associating those terms with. So even though my husband was completely calm, that he was laughing about it like it was nothing, my brain immediately went, oh my God, you're about to get in trouble. You're about to get judged. You need to be able to tell him everything. And so that's what I see triggers as. It's just unhealed pieces that our brain has held on to. And until we teach our brain that, like, hey, this is not the same situation, and reprogram that new belief, it's going to continue to come up. But you have to be the one who's willing to fix that, not just tell people, oh, you triggered me, and then try to get away from it. That's not solving the issue. That's just using it as an excuse.
I love that you said that, because I think I hear, that is a common language of like, oh my gosh, I was triggered. But there's that missing element of like, what is the trigger? Why is it affecting me? And then how do I move forward in it? And I think that there's so much coming out of the fold of coaches that are really putting forward like solutions to that, right? Because I think we started off with being aware that this is actually happening. So tell us what the Lotus Effect is, because I know that all of this language, everything we're talking about leads to this. So what is Lotus Effect?
I love that you asked me that. It's like my favorite question. So the Lotus Effect, funny enough, was born out of a rebrand. And the rebrand was a couple of years ago when I decided that my old company just didn't resonate with me. I literally spent like 3 days going back and forth on words, and Lotus kept coming up. The Lotus for me is extremely symbolic. So a few years after getting out of my abusive relationship, when I started kind of on my healing journey, I wanted something that really symbolized to me that it didn't matter what I had been through. I had the opportunity to be absolutely beautiful. And the lotus is something that really symbolized that for me. The lotus grows in mud. It grows in dirty water. everywhere. Like that's where it grows. But every time that it rises to the surface, it's beautiful. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not dirty. It's not stained. It's beautiful. And so it was my first tattoo that I got when I was like 35. And I got it as something to remind me. And so when I started thinking about the name for the company, the whole reason behind the Lotus Effect was because that's what I was already doing with people. Whether we were strategically planning in their business, whether we were just having a coffee chat, or whatever the case may be, we were affecting each other the way that the lotus does. I was meeting them in their mud, explaining them to mine, and helping them see through it so that they had the ability to turn into whatever it is that was beautiful to them. And so that's where the Lotus Effect came out of. And I truly do believe that we all have our own journey. We just have to figure out how to get out of the mud, how to appreciate the mud that we've been in, and then rise to the surface to turn into whatever it is that you choose to be.
Yeah, the appreciating part, right? Appreciating the mud. For me personally, I felt like I wallowed too long in this mud. Why this mud? Right? Instead of like, actually, because of that mud, I'm so resilient and I'm so amazing and all of the good things. So let's pretend that you walk into a cafe and you see that 25, 30-year-old version of you, and you want to talk to her about something resilient, right? Because that's really what all of this story is, what the lotus, the flower, the resilience through the mud. What do you think you could tell her that she would actually listen to about what that means, right? Because it's not just like telling her something, but remember that version of you. Would you have listened to what you said?
It depends on what I had told her. I think that for many of us, we say that, gosh, if I could have just gone back and told myself this, I would have listened. I wouldn't have. I know I wouldn't have. Because if I would have listened to some of the other subtle signs that happened before that. If I could go back, though, and I could give her any sense of peace, understanding, or knowing that there's something beyond what she is going through in that moment, I think I would tell her, you may not see the road ahead of you because of the muck that's in your eyes, but I can promise you, if you continue to push, one day your eyes are going to be crystal clear.
Wow. And see, and I think that's the parables of our lives, right? When we go back to our younger selves, like people often think like, oh, parables are terrible, or Lao Tzu and the Bible. There's all of these great books that have these profound words, but we all think like, what does that mean? But I think that's what we're trying to say is if we saw our younger selves and we could just say the one thing that maybe doesn't hit them right away, but they can go back to and go, I remember that. Like that, I think is a space where now in hindsight, we can look back at and go, yeah. So tell us now, Kat, now that you've, pushed forward and you're this amazing human being, you're out there karaokeing and being on the radio and doing your podcast and speaking on stages. What is next for Lotus Effect?
Whoa, what is next? Honestly, especially for next year, I feel like what is next is starting to make an impact in those that will be in the careers that people will need that have been through trauma, right? So those that are in criminal justice, those that are in psychology, those that are in social work, those that are going to be in fields that are going to always see trauma, right? I can't fix trauma. But for those that are going to be in those fields because they've chosen it for whatever reason, I want to impact them so that when they are dealing with people like I was in my 20s, they have an experience that they can tie back and say, oh my gosh, I remember when she said this, and have a little bit more grace and a little bit more understanding. That's the impact that I want to make.
Wow, that's beautiful. And I agree with you because I think especially in fields where it's immediate response for physical safety, right? Passion doesn't necessarily kick in as an emotion. It's more about survival. And that can be a little bit harsh for some people because everybody is different in that way. Then in your podcast and in your radio So I remember you had mentioned that you're also on radio where you're located and your podcast. What do you want that? What's the message there? What do you want people to walk away from when they're listening to your interviews like this?
For me, the whole point of creating the podcast to begin with was I wanted to create a space where I could have very open, sometimes really deep conversations with people that have had pivotal moments in their lives, that have completely done a 180 in the career that they are doing, that are willing to share their failures and are willing to give tips to other people of things that they wish they would have known, so that those that listen hear from it what they need to hear, and they find support in knowing that others are probably going through the same things they are. That's all I wanted. I wanted to create a space of open support and community. And either you find someone that you're like, oh my gosh, they did this, I felt that way, now I know I can push on. Or you find a best friend, right? You can reach out to all these people that have been on there. So whatever you end up wanting to take away from it that you needed at that time, that's all I wanted for the podcast.
Well, and I think that that's what you're doing, right? I really believe that. I mean, when I was connected to you in our first conversation, your energetic field is so infectious. It's like, hey, me too. Yes, we're gonna do this. And immediately I'm currently in a transition from a very deep betrayal to just working to now like, oh my gosh, I think it's time. I think it's time to share my heart with the world and share what heartbreak felt like for me. And although that is a universal emotion, every experience is different, right? And so hearing your heartbreak is also so revealing into that it's never an individual experience. It's a universal experience, but needs to be told from an individual perspective. Because I think my heartbreak was being betrayed by a trusted family friend who stole my business. Your heartbreak was from a romantically involved, emotional depth of abuse. Two totally different things, but we are very synonymous when it comes to heartbreak, right?
Mhm.
That gut, that heart where your mind is so confused and you just feel so achy all around. And now we're all on the other side of that. I think that that's the beauty of what podcast is doing today. They say this is the era of the podcast. That's what I've been told, but
I'll take it.
I don't know. I think it's just replacing radio in some way or another. Anyhow, so is there any last minute suggestions, golden nuggets that you want to share with people who, number one, might be experiencing some form of abuse currently, or they're out of it and they're in that state of that, when they're relieved that it's done, but then now what? Now what? What's your piece of advice for our listeners?
If I could give anyone a piece of advice that's, either in an abusive situation, has been in an abusive situation, or has had some type of traumatic experience that's just kind of altered their life, I would have to say the more that you can learn to lean in and trust yourself, the more that you are going to see the opportunities that present themselves in front of you. For so long, I looked for validation from everyone else around me. And when I didn't get it, it was judgment towards others, or it was frustration towards others, or it was these unhealed triggers that presented itself. The more that I have learned to let go of what I cannot control and hold on to what is mine and learn what that means for me and how that makes me feel, the easier it's been to move forward in my life. Yes, I still fail. Yes, I still fall on my face, but I am able to get up so much easier than I used to. And it doesn't feel as hard.
Yeah, that's a good one. It doesn't feel as hard because you practice getting up, right? So, well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your energy. Thank you for your vulnerability and your honesty and your openness. I know that this is going to benefit someone. And that someone, we don't know how. They say that each individual has the effect of 250 people around them energetically. Just shifting people's energies is such a huge monumental service to humankind. So I just want to thank you for that. Thank you, everyone. And listen, we're never in this alone. We've got to do this together. Even if you think you're in your own thing, listen, we're all in the same mud. We're all trying to be lotuses, okay? So just listen in, and all of Kat's information will be in our show notes. And again, thank you, thank you, thank you. Until next time, everyone. Goodbye. Thank you so much for being with me on today's journey. If you felt something resonate, if you saw yourself in this conversation, please take a moment to subscribe. Share it with a friend who needs this space and leave a review. It helps others find us, and it's a small way you can be a part of this powerful movement. Ladies, this isn't just a podcast. It's a community, a revolution, a place where midlife women come together to embrace our hard-earned wisdom and vibrant truth. So thank you for being part of this. Remember, it's time. It's time to step into our truth. No more holding back. Midlife is ours to own, and it's only getting started. So, until next time, take a breath, honor your journey, and live with audacity, courage, and joy. This is our time, our truth, unraveled, revealed, and celebrated.